So my dad just arrived yesterday and he hasn't been in Vietnam for 20 years. It's gonna be a pretty wild day. So right now we are taking my dad to look for his old friends.
The last time my dad saw his friend was 20 years ago when he last visited. We decided to look first in this market where Uncle Dam's sister works.
So he's having a little trouble because no one knows who he's talking about. It's been too long.
Đúng rồi. Giờ cho nó dẹp rồi.
My dad suddenly remembered that it might have been this other market and was just betting on the fact that they were doing the same business for the last 20 years, which was sell fresh crab. So we went straight to the seafood section, and the local vendor said they actually knew a sister of a thumb who sold crab. She wasn't there, but we found a phone number, so she called for us to let them know that we were on our way. Unfortunately, when we got there, it was not the right thumb.
Still not it.
The very last resort was to go to their house. Same house that he was hoping they lived in since before the war, more than 50 years ago.
He still remembers the alleys.
We rang the doorbell and a man across the alley said they weren't home. But then we heard a voice coming from the house next door, and my dad immediately recognized who it was. We finally found her, and wow, they had a lot to catch up on.
Chắc là sách nhạc là cái gì?
Sách nhạc kia nó để làm chỉ một đống nó mới đem về này.
And of course, she put us in touch with his friend.
Alo Tâm. Đèo mẹ đi kiếm bác của nó kiếm mình rần trời. Đấy Tâm bây giờ sao gặp đấy?
We had to wait a couple hours, but the moment had finally arrived. After 20 years, my dad was reunited with his best friend.
Wow, bác Tâm.
We hit up a local noodle shop and they spent the rest of the day catching up. Fun fact is they were actually on opposite sides of the war. Uncle Dam's entire family were communist sympathizers and he was locked up by the southern regime for holding protests as a university student, while my dad was in the South Vietnam Air Force training to be a helicopter pilot. Ideology wasn't enough to end their more than 60-year friendship.
We at the mall today, doing a little shopping. Xong gỡ cái tag ra, nhìn kỳ quá.
The next thing to do was to show my dad the best food in Saigon. Not gonna be easy. My favorite tofu dessert. He was impressed, but it was all about the homemade Vietnamese style yogurt. My favorite pho restaurant. Too salty apparently. A little bit of fusion fine dining at Rock Bistro. Very popular Hue restaurant, unimpressed. Super popular crab restaurant. He liked the food, not so much the service. Very famous restaurant serving homemade Vietnamese food, not worth the price in his opinion. And his favorite food in Vietnam, poke bowl.
Ủa là mình tofu á. Tofu. 10.000. 10.000 là bao nhiêu? 10 cent hả? Hả?
So truth is, my dad is right about to retire from his job, working at a community college in Los Angeles. His life back home is comfortable, but a little bit lonely. My two sisters are fairly close, but not close enough for him to see them regularly. And both are very busy, taking care of their families. So ever since I told my dad I've moved to Vietnam for good, he finally made the decision. So while he's here, I'm not just showing him the glamorous things.
Taking my dad to the supermarket.
I wanted to show him the everyday and give him a feel of what it might be like for him. The other really big thing that he wanted to do while he was here was look for his dad's ashes. My dad was born in the north of Vietnam, in Nam Dinh province, right after the partition of Vietnam into North Vietnam and South Vietnam in 1954. His family left the communist north to settle in Saigon's District 10 when he was just 1. So although he is a northern boy, he spent virtually his entire life in Saigon. However, his dad died when he was just 11, and the ashes were kept at this church, which had gone through renovations. And with no one to look after my grandpa's ashes in so many years, my dad was afraid they'd be gone. And it seemed like that was what ended up happening. We couldn't find my grandpa's name. My dad called my aunts to let them know grandpa's ashes were gone. But then he remembered. Vietnamese spelling sometimes switched the Y and the I.
Đây là chữ ngắn 131.
There he was. Passed away in May 1965, 2 months after the first American combat troops landed in Vietnam. My dad was just 11. And it hit me that he had gone through the war years, the upheaval, the chaos, without his dad. He's never told me much about his life during those years, other than it was hard. And his mom, my grandma, toiled night and day to raise him and his 4 sisters. He also had an older half-sister whose husband served in the infantry and was killed in the Battle of Saigon. And his older half-brother was put into a re-education camp for many years after the war. So I can imagine, for many of our first-generation immigrant parents, returning to Vietnam is emotional, confusing, complicated. I can understand why it took him so long to come, and it became clear how different we perceive it. For me, it's full of wonder. I see Vietnam now, and I'm excited for its future. Its past is just something I've read about, heard stories about. My dad had seen Vietnam's past. He lived through it. He can also see its progress, its high buildings, its vibrancy, all the opportunity, and the sense of community that wasn't always easy to find in the US. But he can also hear its ghosts.
Sống là cái chết.
Dạ, sống.
Chết luôn hả?
Sống.
Sống là chết rồi. Tới lúc chốt bằng trong Nam này thôi. Sống trong Nam này dễ hơn, không dễ thở đâu.
On the surface, it might seem odd that even though I never grew up here, I can easily call it home. But for my dad, it's much more complicated. So is he moving here? Private as he is, I just don't know. But at least he likes the food, most of the time.
Ok, bye nha.
Okay, bye bye ba. Safe travel.
Rồi sáng đến sân bay nhắn cho biết. Ok.